Movie reviews. Wonder Woman 1984. Now this is one of the biggest, I'd say up until this point, blockbuster that is going straight to streaming. You can watch it on HBO Max right now. It's also very significant in the fact that this is the first of the next year of Warner Brothers movies that's going to go to HBO Max the same day as being released in theaters. So you can watch Wonder Woman 1984 right now in theaters. I chose to watch it on HBO Max, and whatever way you decide to watch it is going to play more and more into this little experiment to see where the theater industry goes from here. It's a much larger conversation, this movie alone, so let's just get to Wonder Woman 1984. What did I think of it? Oh boy, where do we even start? Maybe we start with the DCEU, because up until this point, they haven't really had the easiest road of getting established as a universe. And I don't know if Wonder Woman 1984 is going to help it. Now, the first Wonder Woman I really enjoyed, and I think a lot of people did. That seems to be one of the more favorable ones out of the entire DCEU. So naturally, Wonder Woman 1984 had a lot of hype surrounding it. Now, I didn't have too much expectations going into it. It seemed like a lot of people did, however, just because it's colorful, it's nostalgic. I mean, we love the 80s, right? I think I want to start there, though, because you would think with the title of 1984 that this movie would heavily rely on the 80s being a major asset to the plot. But it's really not. This movie opens up with a mall, and we see the colors, we see the music, we see the fashion. It's just 1980s everywhere. But then after that, the movie kind of just goes away from it, and there's references to it here and there, more so with the fashion and the just making jokes to try to relate to what we or some of us remember. That's really it. It doesn't really have anything else to do with the 80s. And at one part I was kind of enjoyed that, because I'm not a huge fan of just pulling on nostalgic strings just for the sake of doing that, but it just felt odd because I was expecting this movie to be much more colorful and vibrant and 80s than it actually was. The cast, obviously, Gal Gadot coming back from what I consider to be a rough 2020, at least in the public eye. Chris Pine returns in a way that I don't want to spoiler, but just know he is back. That's not a spoiler because it's very much in the trailer, which I think is a little odd, but he is very much a co-lead in this movie. Kristen, Wiig, and Pedro Pascal are newcomers to this franchise, which I'll get into both their characters later. The thing I want to talk about right now, though, is the fifth bill is Robin Wright, who has hardly anything to do in this movie. Now, if you remember in the first movie, she had a pretty big role, and the only thing we see in this movie is in the opening 5 minutes before that mall scene I even mentioned. It's really just a flashback, and I'm just mind blown that at the beginning of the movie, her name pops up there as if she's going to be the fifth most important person in this movie when she's probably like 20th. All that to say is whoever her manager is doing a great job of getting her name up there. So the acting in this movie, I would say, is fine. Gal Gadot, honestly, to me was a little boring, especially compared to the other DCEU films I've seen her in. I do really enjoy her chemistry with Chris Pine, and I think they definitely got a good connection going, and I'm glad they brought him back for that. But outside of her relationship with him, it felt like her character was just a little flat to me. Now, Kristen Wiig's character as the villain, Cheetah, I thought was amazing. I love Kristen Wiig. I think she's hilarious, but also a great actress in every serious role I've seen her in, and I think she fit right into this universe. My biggest complaint with her, though, is she really wasn't the main villain. She felt more like the side piece to Pedro Pascal's character, and I found that to be a bit odd. I thought there were some really interesting things explored with her character and her backstory, and it kind of just felt thrown away in the third act. It's like we're building her up, building her up, building her up, and then the third act comes and she does nothing to do with the ending. Pedro Pascal, compared to Gal Gadot, is having a great 2020. His role as a villain was interesting. In one sense, I found it really just messy and not very good, but on the other hand, the more I thought about it, I kind of like having this cheesy camp sort of villain. It's definitely a different approach than most superhero movies are taking. You think of like Black Panther and Killmonger, how deep that villain's character was that made you almost relate to him, and you think of someone like Thanos, who's just pure evil at the core. And then you even go back to movies like The Dark Knight, how Joker was such a realistic villain, and then the new Joker was also just like a very realistic, I suppose, villain. This one takes the opposite effect, because this is just a cartoon villain, which we honestly haven't seen in a couple years, and that's why I don't have a major issue with it, but he's just out there. He's just very, animated to the point of it just doesn't make sense. It's not a real person, and this isn't a real movie, and I think if you're not okay with it, that's perfectly fine. But if you like that kind of style of villain, I don't know, whatever. I personally just didn't seem to relate or care to his story. And by the time the third act came around, it was just so generically cheesy superhero movie. I honestly just didn't care. I think another reason I didn't care by the third act was this movie was so long. This movie was 2.5 hours long. Now, I was surprised to learn that the first Wonder Woman honestly isn't that much shorter. I think the runtime differs by like 10 minutes, but for whatever reason, that movie felt so much shorter. I think if you're going to make a long movie like that, I think anything over like 2 hours, it has to be a really good story. But this just doesn't really have it. It just hits the same beats that a lot of generic superhero movies have, and honestly, I think this does a huge disservice to the credit that the DCEU has right now. I think it's just disappointing because Wonder Woman is such a cool character, and I enjoyed her first movie a lot. I think the biggest complaint about that movie, interestingly enough, was that the villain was not fleshed out at all. He was just kind of thrown in the third act. Here you go, here's a generic villain, fight him. This movie is the opposite approach. It spends way too much time at the villain. We have way too much backstory on both of them, and we almost learn nothing about Wonder Woman. It feels like she doesn't accomplish anything. It feels like she doesn't learn any lessons. And her and Steve Rogers, Chris Pine's character, are just kind of there to fight the bad guy, and that's really it. To be completely honest, the only moral I can take away that I'm not going to give away due to spoilers, but it feels like she already learned that in the first movie. Now, to get into some positives, I did enjoy most of the action scenes, and I say most of them because I could not get on board with the cinematography, the choreography. I don't know what it was, but a lot of the fight scenes specifically, when they would just go in slow motion, it looked just terrible in my opinion. I think they really tried their best to show how she fights as a superhuman goddess and what it would look like if it was like slow-mo on our level, but it looked really tacky. Now, it's not to say all the action scenes were just terrible, because they honestly were very cool. The set pieces were fantastic. Hans Zimmer on the score, my goodness, I thought it was beautiful. There's one specific scene where she gains a new ability, let's say, or at least learns how to harness her powers. Very much trying to avoid spoilers here, but when she does this, the score hits. It's honestly beautiful. There's a lot of flashy colors. It's very bright when it wants to be, which is the most interesting part because it has these high moments of cinematography, score, acting, and then it just has these very low moments, and unfortunately the low moments really outweigh the positive moment. It's a movie that I think is very much going to get lost within the DCEU movies and unfortunately fall to the bottom half of that. Is it the worst DCEU movie out there? Absolutely not, because let me remind you, there are some stinkers. Is it the best one? No, but it's not short by much. Overall, I'm going to be generous because I did have an enjoyable time watching this. I'm going to give it 3 out of 5 stars. If you follow me on Letterboxd, and you should. So that's Wonder Woman 1984. Have you seen it? What do you think? Comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this, and I will see you next time.